Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take stacks of sources, notes, and research and break them down into the crucial nuggets you need to know. Today, we are undertaking a massive historical journey. We're heading back thousands of years to explore the foundational layers of ancient India. And this isn't just about dates and kings. It's about understanding the deep roots of a modern civilization.
It is. And for you, the listener, this is an essential deep dive.
Right.
Our mission today is to move past the superficial chronology and really extract the fundamental, enduring insights from all this material.
Okay.
We're focusing on three major intertwined themes. First, how civilization was actually developed, from scratch.
Right.
Second, how this complex and pretty unique idea of unity and diversity was established across such a vast subcontinent.
And third.
And third, the essential and often challenging relationship between those ancient social structures and the country's trajectory today.
Okay, let's unpack this with purpose then.
Yeah.
I think we need to answer three core questions for you. First, how did life transition from this precarious, uncertain existence to a secure, settled civilization?
The foundational question.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
How did such a geographically massive and culturally diverse region manage to forge and maintain a fundamental sense of unity that, it persists millennia later?
A huge question.
And finally, what parts of the ancient social structures, particularly the uncomfortable and frankly unjust ones, are still influencing and, inhibiting India in the present day? This is about getting to the bedrock.
And that tension you just mentioned between the undeniable achievements of the past and the burden of its social structures, that's where the real analysis lies.
Right.
Understanding the roots of both the prosperity and the prejudice is key to appreciating the current landscape. So we need to start right at the very beginning.
The building block.
The very basic building blocks that allowed complex human life to flourish on the subcontinent.
When we study any history, we always begin with that basic question. How did people figure out how to live securely? What was the logistical solution that allowed them to stop constantly moving and, start building something lasting? When you look at the earliest cultures in India, what defines that moment of maximum significance?
The maximum significance, I think, lies in the shift from precarity to security. And that transition is marked by two things: the beginnings of agriculture and the beginnings of stock raising.
Okay.
Before that, life was just precarious. It was dependent on the success of hunting and gathering, which means communities had to be small and they had to be mobile.
Constantly on the move.
Constantly. But once agriculture, the domestication of crops and stock raising, the domestication of animals, once they took hold, that made life definitively secure and settled.
It's a profound change in the human relationship with the environment. It means you're no longer just taking from the land.
Exactly. You're actively managing it. You're investing in it.
And that secure living and the surplus it creates, that's the prerequisite for everything else, isn't it? Complex thought, culture, trade, and eventually politics. What practical achievements are we seeing from these ancient inhabitants as they transition to this settled lifestyle?
Well, the sources show a tremendous burst of ingenuity, really focused on resource utilization. They weren't just passively reacting to the climate or the geography. They were actively creating the very means for their livelihood.
So proactive.
Very. We see sophisticated arrangements emerging for, say, food storage, for durable shelter, and critically, for transport. These are the logistical solutions, the basic infrastructure, that transform a migratory band into a settled society.
A society capable of sustaining large populations.
Exactly. And crucially, these were not skills for just a specialized elite. These were foundational skills for the entire community.
Everyone had to know this stuff.
Yes. We see the development of the cornerstones of the economy. Farming, which obviously enabled that food surplus. Spinning and weaving, which provided necessary clothing and protection. And perhaps most revolutionary for resource extraction, metalworking. These skills allowed for surplus, which in turn permitted specialization, the beginnings of trade, and the kind of hierarchical organization that marks growing social complexity.
That's the logical chain we have to follow then. The physical act of settling and creating surplus, it doesn't just end with a comfortable village. It immediately leads to political structure.
It has to.
That stability requires governance.
Precisely. You can track the logical evolution right across the subcontinent. Initial communities start this arduous process of clearing dense forests, a massive collaborative physical undertaking.
I can't even imagine.
And this leads to the founding of villages. As villages grow and multiply, and as specialized labor increases, they coalesce into cities. These become centers of trade, of administration, and once you have cities, what do you inevitably get?
The eventual formation of large, organized kingdoms.
Right, because you need centralized systems to manage resources, to defend trade routes, and to govern the relationship between all those settled areas.
So the political narrative of centralization literally springs right out of the soil. But there is one final benchmark that truly elevates these settlements to the level of civilization in the historical sense, and that is documentation.
Knowing how to write.
The intellectual leap of knowing how to write.
That's the benchmark that locks in progress. Writing allows laws, religious thought, commercial transactions, history itself, to persist beyond one generation. And the continuity here is, well, it's astounding. The material makes it crystal clear. The different forms of writing prevalent across India today are all descendants of these ancient scripts.
That is a deep, unbroken historical connection. When we talk about these scripts, we often talk about the Brahmi script in particular, right? Which is the ancestor of so many modern writing systems. What does that single lineage tell us about cultural stability?
It tells us that despite political fragmentation, despite linguistic evolution, the foundational tool of literacy remained surprisingly unified. Brahmi is often called the mother of all modern Indian writing systems. The very mechanism by which knowledge is stored, whether you're reading Bengali or Tamil or Hindi, is rooted in that ancient discovery.
It's an intellectual inheritance.
An inheritance that binds together the entire land.
And the same deep roots apply to spoken language, I assume. We tend to focus on the scripts, but the linguistic heritage is just as critical.
Absolutely. The modern languages spoken today didn't just appear fully formed. They have ancient origins. They developed gradually, intertwining, shifting phonetically, and, evolving over millennia within this specific geographic context. This profound continuity in both written and spoken culture provides a shared foundational identity, even if the forms themselves diversified wildly later on.
So it means that if you trace back the vocabulary you use today, you land squarely in that agricultural foundational era.
Yes. The languages are living testaments to the choices and the interactions of those first settled communities. And that realization, that continuity through language, is the perfect bridge to our next section. How these foundations were then constantly redefined by a continuous external infusion.
Okay. We've established the local foundations, agriculture, writing, early political structure. This brings us to truly remarkable aspect of ancient India. It was never a story of isolation, was it?
Not at all. It was a continuous, complex, often explosive intermingling of diverse peoples, leading to a profound cultural and ethnic fusion.
And what's fascinating here is that the subcontinent, because of its geographical richness and that stability we talked about, it acted as a cultural magnet.
A magnet and a sponge. It consistently absorbed wave after wave of people who migrated, settled, and ultimately contributed to the evolving identity.
So it's not just internal evolution, it's constant external remodeling. So who are the major groups the sources identify that made India their permanent home, and how significant was their collective contribution?
The material lists several key ethnic and cultural groups encompassing millennia of migration. You have the pre-Aryans, the Indo-Aryans, the Greeks, the Scythians, the Hunas, and eventually the Turks.
That's a huge timeline. The scale of this movement is staggering.
It is. And critically, the sources emphasize that each group contributed their specific might to the evolution, not just to the political structure, but to the social system, art, architecture, language, and literature.
That's a powerful catalog of influences. I mean, when we think of the Greeks, we think of classical knowledge and sculptural techniques influencing art in the Northwest.
Exactly. The Greeks arriving in the Northwest, particularly after Alexander, brought Hellenistic artistic traditions that profoundly shaped sculpture. That's where you get the Gandhara school of art, a perfect physical manifestation of this fusion.
Right. And what about groups like the Scythians and Hunas?
Well, they might have initially been seen as foreign invaders, but they were eventually assimilated. Their social and military practices were woven into the fabric of the existing political landscape.
And here is the core defining insight about this entire process. This fusion was so complete that the original ingredients cannot be easily separated.
That is the crucial takeaway. These cultural traits commingled so completely, so inextricably, that you cannot currently identify them in their original pure form. It's a profound historical truth. It means the resulting culture isn't a simple legacy of one dominant group imposing its will. It's a complex, hybridized entity.
This idea of inextricable blending is really powerful, but historians often still use labels like North and South or Aryan and Dravidian. Doesn't that historical labeling sometimes obscure the fusion that was actually happening on the ground?
That's an excellent point. While the distinction between, say, Aryan elements Vedic and Puranic culture of the North and pre-Aryan elements like Dravidian and Tamil culture of the South, while that distinction existed, the evidence proved the boundary was always porous. The exchange was reciprocal.
It wasn't a rigid separation.
Not at all. The sources show a dynamic, continuous exchange.
And we have concrete linguistic evidence of this North-South exchange that challenges that idea of rigid separation. What are the earliest signs of this fusion, visible even in the foundational texts?
You find this evidence embedded deep within the language of the North itself. Munda, Dravidian, and other non-Sanskritic terms appear right in the Vedic texts, which we date to the period of 1500 to 500 BC.
So this fusion is happening at the very genesis of the foundational literature.
It is, and these weren't just random borrowed words, you know. They signify core cultural and institutional concepts.
They do. Like what?
Well, these borrowed terms signify ideas, institutions, products, and settlements specifically associated with peninsular and non-Vedic India. This means that cultural concepts and material elements from the South were being integrated into the foundational texts of the North centuries before the classical era even solidified.
So it shows a profound respect and adoption of non-Aryan elements into that developing Vedic culture.
Yes. And the cultural exchange, then, was clearly a two-way street. The South was also actively integrating elements developed in the Gangetic plains.
Where do we see that?
We see this in the earliest literary tradition of the South, the Sangam literature, which roughly spans 300 BC to AD 600. In those Tamil texts, you find the appearance of Pali and Sanskrit terms. These terms signify the ideas and institutions developed in the Gangetic plains.
So the philosophical and religious advances of the North were being willingly integrated into the South's early literary framework.
Exactly. This reciprocal adoption, spanning over a millennium, is really the engine of cultural unity.
We've covered North and South. Let's make sure we acknowledge the contribution of the Eastern region, which often gets less attention in the grand narrative.
The East played a crucial and deeply practical role. That region was largely inhabited by pre-Aryan tribals who spoke the Munda or Kalarian languages, and their contributions weren't philosophical but were foundational to technology and logistics.
What specifically did the Munda languages gift to the emerging Indo-Aryan languages?
Linguists have traced specific Munda linguistic contributions related to technology and daily life. You see terms for the use of cotton, concepts related to navigation, and critically, the term for the digging stick, a fundamental tool of early agriculture.
Wow, so a direct transfer of practical knowledge and terminology from pre-Aryan tribals into the Indo-Aryan linguistic framework.
Yes. The Indo-Aryans weren't just bringing their own culture, they were adopting the successful practical innovations of the groups they encountered.
That's the key realization.
And while Munda pockets exist today, concentrated in areas like the Chotanagpur Plateau, the remnants of Munda culture and language within the wider Indo-Aryan framework are surprisingly strong. It indicates widespread linguistic adoption.
So it wasn't one dominant language overwhelming others.
No. The sources confirm that changes in the phonetics and vocabulary of the Vedic language are attributable as much to Dravidian influence as to Munda influence. It was a complex hybridization happening at the deepest phonetic and vocabulary levels.
And this incredible linguistic and cultural blend naturally extended into the religious sphere. Ancient India was clearly never religiously homogeneous.
Far from it. Ancient India saw the birth of multiple major religions: Brahmanism, Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism. But what truly defines the region is not just the presence of these distinct faiths, but the constant intermingling and interaction between them. They borrowed, they debated, they influenced one another, resulting in a unique, shared spiritual vocabulary.
The philosophical landscape was continuously being reshaped by this internal dialogue.
Continuously.
So we have this relentless blending of races, languages, and religions. If the differences are so vast, how do we define the resulting unity? What is the core insight here?
It connects diversity back to a shared commonality in practice. Despite the enormous differences, People speak hundreds of languages, practice myriad religions, and observe countless regional social customs. They fundamentally follow certain common styles of life.
Certain shared cultural norms.
Yes, and a common narrative structure thanks to the epics. This demonstrates a deep underlying cultural unity that persists beneath all that great linguistic, ethnic, and religious diversity. This unity is cultural, it's experiential, and it's profoundly historical.
And that cultural unity wasn't just left to chance. It was something the ancients actively strove to define, both geographically and politically. So we're shifting now from the organic cultural amalgamation to the attempts to deliberately define and organize this massive region as a single entity.
And the fundamental basis for this striving was geographical. The Indian subcontinent is, in its natural form, a geographically well-defined unit.
Right, with the Himalayas and the seas.
Separated by the Himalayas to the north and the sea on 3 other sides, this inherent geographical unity became the container, which was then filled by the cultural integration we just discussed.
And identity was overlaid onto this geographical container through early political designation.
Yes. Despite the existence of many individual states, languages, and local communities, people gradually developed a shared territorial identity. The territorial units, the Janapadas, were named after the different tribes inhabiting them, establishing a local identity within a larger recognized framework.
Okay, let's track how the entire country, the sum of these Janapadas, evolved its major names, because the semantics of identity are crucial here.
We can trace 3 primary ancient names that define the whole territory. The first was Aryavarta, which means the land of the Aryans. This name, drawn from the dominant cultural community, specifically denoted northern and central India, stretching from the eastern to the western seacoasts.
A cultural and geographical definition.
Exactly. And then we move to the name that defines the country in modern vernacular.
Bharatavarsha.
That's the one. It means the land of Bharata. The name Bharata, in the sense of a powerful tribe or family, is ancient. It figures prominently in texts like the Rig Veda and the Mahabharata.
And the term Bharatavarsha.
The compound name Bharatavarsha occurs in the Mahabharata and post-Gupta Sanskrit texts. By the post-Gupta period, it was conceptualized as one of the 9 divisions of the earth, and then specifically applied to the subcontinent. This period also saw the emergence of the term Bharati, defining a person as an inhabitant of this land.
This shows a clear evolution toward a unified, specific national designation. But here is where it gets absolutely critical and often misunderstood today, the surprising origin and history of the term Hindu.
This is a vital correction point for the historical record. The origin of the term Hindu is purely secular and geographical. It's traced back to Iranian inscriptions from the 5th, 6th centuries BC.
Okay, walk us through the linguistic mechanism that makes this so clear.
It's the famous phonetic shift. The original Sanskrit term for the great river is Sindhu.
The Indus.
The Indus. In Old Iranian, the is sound often shifts to an H sound. Therefore, Sindhu became Hindu. The earliest Iranian inscriptions mention Hindu as a district on the Indus River.
So what's the crucial takeaway for our deep dive, then?
The crucial takeaway is this. In the earliest stage, the term Hindu means a territorial unit. It was strictly a geographical marker for the land adjacent to or beyond the Indus River, used by outsiders looking in. It did not initially indicate a religion, nor did it define a community in a religious sense.
It was just the region of the Sindhu.
That's it.
That completely reframes the entire term, showing how words can carry geographical baggage for thousands of years before they acquire a specific religious or communal identity. Moving from semantics to political ideology, what was the vision of political unity shared by the country's ancient writers and philosophers?
They shared a singular, idealized vision. Ancient writers, poets, and philosophers consistently viewed the country not as a collection of fragmented parts, but as a single, integral unit. They consistently praised the ideal of a single, universal monarch ruling the land, stretching continuously from the Himalayas to the sea.
And this ideal king wasn't just militarily strong. He held a profound, almost philosophical title.
Yes, the title was Chakravarti. It's often translated as he whose chariot wheels roll everywhere.
A great image.
It is. This term was applied to kings who successfully established authority across the entire imagined expanse, from the Himalayas to Cape Comorin in the south, and from the Brahmaputra Valley in the east to the land beyond the Indus in the west. It wasn't just about conquering territory, it embodied the concept that the king maintained cosmic order across the whole land.
And the fascinating part is that this ideal was historically realized, proving that such a vast unification was logistically possible, even if it was extremely difficult. Who were the major figures who achieved this kind of sprawling, unified political control?
The first and most enduring realization came in the 3rd century BC with Ashoka.
Of course.
His Mauryan Empire extended over almost the whole of India, barring the extreme south. The political organization was vast, and the physical evidence of this unity is striking. His rock and pillar inscriptions carrying his message of Dharma are scattered across a major part of the Indo-Pakistan subcontinent, even stretching into Afghanistan.
That coverage demonstrates political unity on a colossal scale. And it's tied together not just by force, but by a shared ethical message.
Precisely. And the second major moment, which demonstrates the ideal's persistence centuries later.
Who was that?
That came much later, during the Classical Age in the 4th century AD, with Samudragupta of the Gupta Empire. He carried his victorious arms far, demonstrating a massive military reach from the Ganga Valley all the way to the borders of the Tamil land. These two examples, separated by over 7 centuries, established a powerful, recurring precedent that the land could, and ideally should, be ruled as a single entity.
But history is rarely that smooth. That political unity was always fragile against regional powers. What happens when the ideal fails?
And we see that challenge constantly. For instance, in the 7th century, the Chalukya king Pulakeshin famously checked the expansion of Harshavardhana, who was titled the Lord of the Whole of North India.
A major check.
A major check. This illustrates the constant push and pull of regional dynamism. However, even when political unity fractured, the political formations that emerged across India still assumed a single general form, a shared understanding of kingship, administration, and legal structure. It suggests a persistent underlying political model.
And finally, this geographical unity was also externally validated by the foreigners who first defined the region for the rest of the world.
That's the ultimate confirmation of the unit's self-definition. Outsiders named the entire country after the Sindhu, or Indus River. This foreign contact led to the name India, which is very close to the Greek term Indikai, and the name Hind in Persian and Arabic languages.
And this geographical naming tradition is how we ultimately arrive at the term Hindustan.
Yes. The term Hindustan emerged later when Iranian rulers conquered the Sanaria in post-Kushan times and named the region based on that territorial designation derived from the Sindhu River. This shows how geopolitical actions cemented names that originated from a purely geographical observation, linking the land across various cultures and centuries.
So we have a geographically defined unit, and we have political ambitions for unity, occasionally realized by these Chakravarti kings. But to hold such a massive, diverse region together long-term, you need powerful cultural mechanisms, linguistic and literary forces that act as the unifying glue.
Absolutely. This ongoing effort to establish a common cultural ground is characterized by a chronological shift in the dominant administrative and intellectual language. We start in the 3rd century BC, where Prakrit served as the lingua franca, the common, accessible language across a major part of India.
Why was Prakrit so effective as a lingua franca during this period?
Because it was the language of the people and the courts. It was accessible and widespread, so it was practical for administration. We see this confirmed by the state's documentation. Ashoka's famous inscriptions, which spanned his vast empire, were primarily written in the Prakrit language, mainly using the Brahma script.
Which confirms its status as the language of official record, governance, and moral instruction for a massive, diverse population during the Mauryan period.
It does, but the linguistic center of gravity shifted over time, moving away from that accessible language to a more formalized one.
To Sanskrit.
Correct. Later, Sanskrit acquired the same position that Prakrit once held, but with a different sociological impact. Sanskrit became the high-status language, the language of the intellectual elite and the state. It served as the state language in the remotest parts of India, even replacing regional languages for official purposes.
And this process was particularly conspicuous during the Gupta period in the 4th century.
Yes, which marks the height of classical Sanskrit culture.
This shift wasn't just a change in vocabulary, though. It represented a change in cultural priorities, elevating a scholarly, ritualistic language into the primary vehicle for high culture and governance.
Absolutely. The switch to Sanskrit suggested a move toward intellectualization and ritualization within the administration. And what is perhaps most fascinating is that even when the political unity we discussed earlier fractured,
When all those small regional states rose up.
exactly, When they rose during the post-Gupta period, the linguistic unity provided by Sanskrit held firm.
That's a critical piece of evidence. Despite political rivalry and fragmentation, the use of Sanskrit persisted.
It did. Official documents and inscriptions were still universally written in Sanskrit, even in states that were actively fighting each other. This suggests that Sanskrit had achieved a level of cultural hegemony, a shared, high-status administrative and literary language that transcended the political rivalries of the era. It acted as a binding force nationwide.
And beyond official state language, the most powerful cultural glue came from the narrative tradition, the great epics. This is the shared cultural operating system you alluded to earlier.
Oh, the unifying power of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata cannot be overstated. They provided a common set of moral, ethical, and mythical references that spanned the entire subcontinent. They transcended regional boundaries entirely. The sources note that these epics were studied with the same dedication and zeal in the land of the Tamils, the extreme south, as they were in the major intellectual circles of Benares and Taxila in the north and west.
That shared reverence is profound. But given the linguistic diversity, how did they ensure accessibility? Did everyone have to read the original Sanskrit?
Not at all, and that's the beauty of their unifying power. While the epics were originally composed in Sanskrit, numerous vernacular versions of them were produced in every different local language throughout the subcontinent over time.
A continuous process of local adaptation.
Yes, and that ensured their relevance and persistence. The key takeaway is simple. Whatever the form of expression, Sanskrit, Tamil, or a regional Bhakti version, the substance of Indian cultural values, ideas, and moral instruction remained largely the same throughout India. That shared narrative provided a bedrock of cultural identity and continuity.
So the political ideal of unity was fragile, but the cultural and linguistic glue was incredibly resilient.
That's the conclusion. The cultural infrastructure, the scripts, the high-status language, and the shared mythology was ultimately stronger than the temporary political formations.
This seamless cultural tapestry leads us directly to the final and most challenging section of our deep dive. The peculiar social system that developed in ancient India, the Varna, or caste system, and its enduring, widespread, often deeply damaging impact on modern India.
This is a system that began in North India but proved so robust and adaptable that it eventually spread its influence throughout the entire country.
Yeah.
It became a foundational mechanism for social organization everywhere.
And its reach extended far beyond the boundaries of the original Hindu faith, which tells you just how ingrained it became in the actual social fabric.
That is a crucial insight into its nature. The sources confirm that its influence extended even to converts to Christianity and Islam. When these groups adopted new religious identities, they often continued to follow some of the old caste practices of Hinduism.
So it functioned less as a purely religious tenet.
And more as a foundational social structural mechanism that dictated marriage, occupation, and status across the subcontinent, regardless of specific belief systems.
This transition brings us directly to the relevance of studying ancient history today. We need to counter the romanticized view of the past.
Exactly. We frequently see people who sentimentalize the past glories and, clamor for the restoration of that old pattern of society and culture. This is an aspiration distinct from preserving heritage like art or architecture. The desire is to restore the social hierarchy and structure.
And that demands that we, as informed observers, possess a clear and correct understanding of the past, not a nostalgic idealization.
Precisely. That means we must hold two truths simultaneously. We have to acknowledge the remarkable progress made by the ancients, but we must also confront the uncomfortable social facts that underpin that progress.
Okay.
So while we must absolutely celebrate the remarkable progress ancient Indians made in various fields, from the invention of the decimal system to monumental architecture to sophisticated literature, we must also stress the reality of historical progress. These ancient advances, while brilliant, cannot compete with modern science and technology today. Attempting to apply 4th century solutions to 21st century problems is illogical.
But the far more uncomfortable truth concerns the internal ethical structure of that society.
And that truth must be confronted directly. Ancient Indian society was marked by gross social injustice. The complex Varna organization that enabled great cultural achievements also created immense systematic inequity.
Can you detail the ancient social inequities that stand out in the sources as most, shocking to the modern mind?
The discrimination against the lower orders, specifically the Shudras, and even lower the untouchables, was systemic and severe. They were encumbered with disabilities that are truly shocking to contemporary sensibilities. Historically, they were often excluded from learning, from access to public spaces like walls and temples, and from political participation.
And what about the status of women?
The sources are equally clear here. Law and custom systematically discriminated against women in favor of men, institutionalizing their age-old subordination. They were often denied independent rights to property, education, and autonomy. This rigid subordination across the lower castes and gender lines defines the gross social injustice referenced in the material.
This leads to the critical historical warning. Why must we resist the sentimental desire to restore that old pattern of society?
Because any attempt to restore the old way of life would, by necessity, revive and strengthen all these inherent inequities. While the success of the ancients in solving logistical and natural difficulties can build hope and confidence for the future, attempting to bring back the past means perpetuating the systemic social inequity that afflicted ancient India. This tension is the true purpose of studying history critically.
Because these ancient structures aren't merely ghosts, they exist today as survival's vestiges of the past that actively inhibit modern progress and development.
That's the critical link to the present day. Old norms, values, social customs, and ritualistic practices are so deeply ingrained, often passed down generationally, that they are extraordinarily difficult to eradicate. And it's important to remember, as the sources note, that these vestiges were often deliberately fostered and exploited during colonial times to maintain divisions, making their eradication a crucial national project today.
So for rapid national development, these vestiges must be rooted out. Let's look at specific practical examples of how these ancient survivals hamper modern India's goals.
We have several clear structural challenges. First, caste and sectarianism are primary obstacles. They actively fracture the social body, hindering democratic integration and impeding developmental efforts by dividing resources and loyalty along sectional lines.
This lack of integration slows the engine of national progress.
It does. And what about the economic impact, the concept of the dignity of manual labor?
How does that connect?
This is a direct inheritance of the caste system, which fundamentally tied occupation to birth. Caste barriers and prejudices still prevent even highly educated individuals from appreciating the dignity of manual labor. This structural prejudice means that certain professions are still stigmatized, leading to systemic labor shortages in critical areas and a failure to pool national talent effectively based on merit, not birth.
And the subordination of women.
Well, despite women being fully enfranchised politically and active participants in modern economic life, a massive modern achievement, their age-old social subordination still prevents them from playing their full due role in society. This structural disadvantage, rooted in ancient custom, persists and is anti-developmental. These survivals fundamentally oppose the modern constitutional goals of equality and justice.
So studying ancient history isn't just an academic pursuit of dusty facts. It's a necessary diagnostic tool for understanding the current social ailments of a nation.
Precisely. Studying the ancient past helps us to deeply examine the historical roots of these current prejudices. It helps us discover the causes that sustain the caste system, keep women subordinate, and promote narrow religious sectarianism. The study is therefore relevant not only for understanding the true nature of the past, acknowledging both the genius and the injustice, but also for understanding the nature of the obstacles that hamper India's progress as a nation today.
It provides the blueprint of the deep-seated cultural problems that modern society is trying to reform. It contextualizes the massive, ongoing battle between aspiration and tradition.
It clarifies that the current challenges are not random occurrences. They are the result of deep historical inertia. Understanding the origin of that inertia is the first step toward overcoming it. We have completed a journey today that spanned millennia, from the first agricultural settlements and the foundational skills of farming and metalworking, through the vast melting pot of races, including Greeks, Scythians, Munda, Dravidians, and Indo-Aryans, that culturally define the subcontinent. We track the striving for geographical and political unity, expressed through the ideals of the Chakravarti kings and the pervasive unifying influence of Sanskrit and the great epics. And finally, we face the enduring legacy of the social system, recognizing that the past contains both immense glory and profound injustice that continues to resonate today.
The success of those ancients in surmounting tremendous geographical and human logistical difficulties can certainly build our hope and confidence for the future. I mean, they built civilization from scratch. But the crucial lesson, the critical tension that history offers, is understanding that bringing back the past uncritically means actively perpetuating systemic social inequity and prejudice. Understanding this tension, the beauty alongside the burden, is the true purpose of studying this history, making it profoundly relevant for you, the listener, today.
Indeed. And if we connect this one last time to the bigger picture, think about the rich linguistic evidence we discussed, the deep cultural and linguistic fusion. We saw Dravidian and Munda terms integrated into the core Vedic texts thousands of years ago. We saw the shared substance of the epics across all regions. This process suggests that the Indian identity at its very core was never meant to be homogeneous or pure. It was forged in dialogue, adoption, and blending. So what does this tell you about the fundamental non-homogeneous and constantly evolving nature of identity in this region? Is the true historical identity defined by unity through assimilation, not by separation or exclusivity?
A profound and necessary question to take with you, especially when analyzing modern debates about identity and belonging. Thank you for diving deep with us today. Continue your exploration of these fascinating source materials. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.